Joseph Ronca, and I'm a professor at Springfield College. These are my own opinions, of course. I teach social work, and I also teach human rights in the School of Social Work, and I'm here at the United Nations in Geneva. And I'm here to interview a representative. Well, actually, he's an ambassador, Ambassador Ronald Barnes, who is chair of the Indigenous Peoples and Nations Coalition here in Geneva. And he's been working for the rights of Alaskans for years. I don't know how many, but he'll tell you about it. And he's also the author of Shadow Reports, and he'll tell you about what Shadow Reports are on the rights of Indigenous peoples to the human rights committees. And I asked him to speak to us about some of the things he's doing here at the UN, to give us a little history of things about Alaska, and then what we can do to help out the cause. Maybe there's nothing we can do, I don't know, but just like to listen to see what Representative Barnes has to say. So, here you go. Good to see you. How do you greet each other in Inuit or whatever? What do I know? You don't
Jamai, we say hello.
Okay.
We say Jamai.
Okay.
And Jamai is the formal way in our language, which is Yupliak.
Okay.
Or if we say Wakka, it's because we know each other better. So it would be one more formal and one less formal because you know someone better. So I will say Jamai.
Like vous and tu in French. This is French-speaking Geneva. Something like that. Anyway, whatever. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome. So we got about half an hour, so you're going to have to give us the whole history of everything and what you're doing. And I also would be interested to know about how the United States government is reacting to a lot of the work that you're doing. If you care to share that.
Yes.
So, past, present, future. That's
okay.
It. Okay, thanks.
I am Ambassador Ronald Barnes because Alaska was listed on the non-self-governing territories under Article 73 of the Charter of the United Nations. And this was listed under General Assembly 66I in 1946. Hawaii was listed, Tunisia, Morocco. So Alaska was given international legal recognition as a territory which is not properly annexed or a part of the United States of America. Mm-hmm. That's the general nature of being a non-self-governing territory. And I was appointed by elders, councils, and grassroots communities, particularly as their ambassador. In Yupik, you would call the representative Kanifta, and that is someone who goes between villages who have disputes. As a rule, nobody could touch because that is a person, if they're in a conflict with weapons, or any other kind of dispute that helps to make the peace and communicates so that we could resolve some conflicts. Now, the elders asked me to be ambassador in 1994, and I accepted this position, and my order was to come to the international community to educate and to teach them that Alaska was not properly annexed by the United States of America, and to pursue the international legal and political status of Alaska. And so I was appointed, and then in Resolution 2005-10 by the Alaska Intertribal Council, it adopted a resolution because Indigenous Peoples and Nations Coalition, which was also created by the Elders Councils, they wanted me to make them ambassador of this, the elders, and then this was adopted by a number of tribes at a statewide tribal meeting, which comes out as AITC Resolution 205-10. So here I am in Geneva, Switzerland, advocating for the rights of the Indigenous peoples of Alaska, who still have the right to self-determination. And Indigenous peoples of Alaska discovered this when, after a study by the Statehood Commission of Alaska, they issued what they called the Alaska Statehood Commission Report in 1982, And in this report, they characterize Alaska Indigenous peoples as still having the right of independence, or to choose a compact of free association, or to choose any other form of relationship with the United States of our own choosing. And to use another example, Micronesia is a compact of free association. So the Indigenous peoples of Alaska would like to have this information formally disseminated to them on the status, and that they make the free, informed choice of the level of relationship after going through the United Nations decolonization process. And so it's actually a decision and choice of the peoples.
Right.
And so the peoples are to be fully informed, to know about the subject, to be able to discuss it with each other, to learn about the status and how it relates to other nations and states and United States, and to determine exactly what kind of relationship they would like to develop. And we presented a shadow report to the Human Rights Committee, which
Do
is...
you want to explain what a shadow report is to our viewers?
Yes, a shadow report is a report where under one of the treaty bodies, and I'll use the example of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which is a human rights treaty.
Right. Which came after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights,
Yes.
as some of the viewers know.
Yes, it was adopted in 1966. Now, the United States did not agree to the optional protocol, so it didn't accept the jurisdiction of the Human Rights Committee, which is the committee which will look at the implementation of the provisions of the Convention for the human rights provisions to determine whether or not they're following the Convention. So the United States will present its report, and an NGO or people's human rights groups on the ground will send a shadow report and say, they will say, well, the United States said this, but this is our perception of the view, and this is our relationship as we see it under Article 1, and we have to cite the articles and say, Alaska was recognized under Article 1, which
Right.
includes the list of non-self-governing territories, and we have the right to self-determination under international law. This right was violated, so you have the obligation to address the violation. And so we gave a good history of Alaska.
And where could we get hold of your shadow report?
You could find it on the internet of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Okay.
You would look in the treaty body session. You would go to the year 2006.
Okay.
It was presented to the March session in New York, and also to the, which was the 86th session, and also the 87th session, which was here in Geneva in July of 2006.
Okay.
And
Go ahead.
in this shadow report, what we presented was Alaska has the right to independence still. The 1867 treaty is an invalid treaty. The right of self-determination belongs to the Indigenous peoples of Alaska as holders of this right because they are vested with the right. So we said that the 1958 referendum removing Alaska from the list was illegal for several reasons, among them that the United States military voted.
Oh yeah, do you want to explain how Alaska became a state?
Well, it was a territory. After the purchase, the United States knew that they had not legitimately purchased Alaska, and it wasn't a legitimate territory of the United States. In another shadow report to the Universal Periodic Review, which is a new mechanism of the Human Rights Council, we put in a paragraph.
Yeah, by the way, the United States is coming up tomorrow, actually. We could talk about that.
Yeah.
I'd like you're going to respond to it, and if you could tell me what you're going to say
Okay.
after this, okay?
Yes,
All right.
but let me finish the
Yeah.
explanation here.
Okay.
I found a law review from the late 1800s, and in this law review, President Thomas Jefferson stated after the 1803 purchase of Louisiana Territory, stated that there is no provision of the Constitution of the United States which allows us to acquire foreign territory. It would take an amendment to the Constitution in order for us to legitimately acquire this as part of the United States of America. So that gives you an idea of some of the obstacles that the United States of America had to overcome. They didn't address this. They knew it was an obstacle. They didn't address it. So here's what they did after the Treaty of Cession. There was the 1901 Downs v. Bidwell case, where concerning Puerto Rico, and they created what they call the Doctrine of Incorporation. It's one of the unilateral doctrines and principles that are created, and it's created out of dicta, or what you call just editorial opinions from prior cases, and they inserted it as a principle or doctrine of law, and the Doctrine of Incorporation was established in this 1901 Downs v. Bidwell case, and they simply placed the Treaty of Cession as into this decision and said Alaska is incorporated.
Right.
Now we had a later UN report. It was one of the periodic reports of the Professor Miguel Alfonso Martinez, who stated that the 1867 Treaty of Cession between the monarchy of Russia to the United States of America granted no title and no jurisdiction to the United States. The title still belonged to the indigenous peoples of Alaska, and the jurisdiction, the governing authority, still belonged to the indigenous peoples of Alaska. Why? In 1821, when the Russian Promyslensky was losing their fur trade, it was becoming less profitable for them. So what they did was they asked the Tsar to intervene for them, because there was United States of America, Spain, if you could see, there's Cordova and Valdez, that's the Spanish presence in Alaska. There was British colonies here, or settlements, and other European nations were trading freely with us. So when the monarchy of Russia said, all you European nations are in our territory, you have to come to our trading forts and trade with these indigenous peoples only from the trading forts. The United States was the first to respond, and they said, no, 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 no. They said, first of all, we traded with them for many years, as well as these other nations, without your interdiction. You did not stop us. Therefore, we have the right to trade freely with them. What they were saying, basically, is that we had international discourse and trade as independent people. And they cited Vattel and his treatise Law of Nations, Emeritus Vattel. And they said, furthermore, if you think you acquired anything, you would have to have done it under a number of years of peaceable and uncontestable possession. And so what the United States said was, the Tlingits burnt down your forts, so they interrupted possession, and you had other incidents of interruption of possession. The other point is, you're sitting on Kodiak and Sitka. These are islands adjacent to the continent. In order for you to acquire title and dominion to the continent, you have to be on the continent. There is nowhere under the Law of Nations that allows you to sit on islands and claim the continent. It's the other way around. And so after this dispute, it cast a shadow, because it's what you call a declaration against interest. The United States admitted Russia had no title and dominion, they went one step further. They said, as far as we are concerned, these are independent tribes inhabiting an independent territory. And if you try to stop us, the only way that you could stop us is if we are in a state of war. In any case, you can't stop us anywhere on the high seas. But we're trading with free and independent peoples. And this came out in the 1803. If you look at the history in the 1903 boundary tribunal between the United States and Great Britain, when they were attempting to draw the line of demarcation between Alaska and what you see as Canada. That in itself also was unsuccessful, and there's another story to that, but that'd be too much.
Yeah, can't do everything in,
yeah.
in
So
30 minutes.
what we established is that the United States admitted we were not part of Russia, we were foreign to Russia, and that we were independent from Russia. Which is why in 1946 they voluntarily placed us on the list of non-self-governing territories under Article 73 of the Charter of the United Nations, and obligated themselves to address this question. Instead, they concealed this question. They put a blackout on the information that should have came to us. They stacked the United States military because after World War II, Alaska and Hawaii were both strategic buffer military zones between the East and the West. So they needed to have Alaska as their security buffer zone. So they didn't want to address the question, not to mention the fact that they were already exploiting the mineral resources, the fish, and also the oil in Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
So we placed a lot of this in our shadow report. And little did anyone know here at the United Nations that Alaska was removed from the list with the same status that Indonesia, Tunisia, Morocco, French Somaliland, which became Djibouti, to mention a few. And so we listed the violations, the irregularities in voting, where the military were allowed to vote, and that was an absolute no-no.
You want to talk a little bit about that? I was getting at that before, about how Alaska became a state. It was voted in or something.
Yeah.
And the United States paid the military to vote. And
Yeah.
didn't even consult with the indigenous peoples.
They worked through the American citizens who were brought there, and they used something which they declassified in the late 90s and early 2000s, called the 1933 Matanuska Colonization Project.
Okay.
So this Matanuska Colonization Project, 1929 was the collapse, the economic collapse. And 1933 they were still rebuilding, so they paid somewhere about $3,000 US per family to move up to Alaska into this valley and to develop, but they needed them to come up and colonize. So that's where this so-called independence movement from Alaska comes from, aside from our independence movement. But they got those people to organize along with others, and they created a draft constitution. They brought this vote, which was not administered or monitored by the United Nations. And if it's under Article 73, there's the resolutions adopted by the General Assembly, which is known in terms of United Nations language, is factors and principles. These were simply the guidelines that the United States of America should have used as the administering power to bring Alaska to the place where they could decide whether or not they wanted to be independent, compact of free association like Puerto Rico, or to choose another level of status. But we were essentially recognized with a form of independence, and we had not agreed to be part of the United States. So this goes back to the question that Thomas Jefferson raised. And when we brought the shadow report, the experts here said they have two things against them. They have a violation of the Constitution of the United States of America, and they have a violation of the international legal status.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
now the other part, what he asked also about this vote, was they put together a constitution. In 1955, the U.S. Supreme Court adopted the Teton v. United States of Alaska.
Yeah, tell them about that. It's interesting.
This is, now, in this...
Supreme Court Teton.
Teton. Now, Hugo Black was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, sworn into the Ku Klux Klan for life, and agreed and swore to uphold white supremacy till the day he died. He claimed he was not going to, but it comes out in the decision very clearly. What he did, along with other justices, was they imported the 1823 Johnson v. McIntosh case, and which says that we had to adhere to the superior genius of the European civilization, that we, based on the 1493 Papal Bull's decree, which basically was a decree of the Pope saying go out and Christianize, and you have the broad right to do this and to exploit and to bring back. But they did this with potentates of Europe, or kings and queens of Europe. So they went out and they exploited us in the name of God and by this decree of the Pope. So the 1823 Johnson v. McIntosh case stated that we had to give up our sovereignty and title to the territory in exchange for the Christian religion which they were bestowing upon us to save our souls, and that was the trade. The other point was they said that we had to adhere to the superior genius of the European civilization, and that was the 1823 J.B. McIntosh case. And then they imported it to Alaska, and then in Alaska, if you look at footnote 18, they virtually say that the land is for the white race, settlement of the white race. But they justify this, if you read through the decision itself, saying that, well, every American schoolboy knows that we trotted across America, we took away Indian territory and land. The problem with Alaska, they have a higher standard because it was listed in the Charter of the United Nations, these factors and principles I mentioned. One resolution, General Assembly Resolution 644, stated that the United States of America, or any administering power, it said any administering power had to abrogate any discriminatory law and policy. That meant that the discriminating laws and policies that were applied had to be abolished, and the peoples were to be informed in their indigenous languages, and they had to know and speak on the matter to understand what their status is, to speak in this language, and to make a decision where they know the consequence of their decision, knowing full well what they are deciding.
Right.
Instead,
yeah, informed consent.
Yeah, informed consent. So instead they created this institution, which is a violation of Article 73B, because Article 73B, it says it's supposed to be the free political institutions of the peoples concerned, meaning that the institutions had to come from indigenous peoples from Alaska. They created institutions, and from these institutions they created the vote. And the United States put in some laws that if indigenous peoples couldn't read and write 10 lines of the Constitution, they were not allowed to vote. And if they attempted, they were subject to $500 fine, 6 months in jail, or both if they got caught.
Incredible.
So there was this, well, you have to understand that 1955 was when Rosa Parks stood up. So it was very discriminating in the United States. So it was very different from today. And so they were happy to discriminate. And 1955-56 is when South Africa, on the international scale, started their movement against apartheid. So when you look at the apartheid convention, Alaska still is under apartheid law and policy. And there's institutional racism in Alaska.
Oh, yeah.
And we are subjects of international law still. And we have the right to pursue our independence. It's not legitimately a part of the United States of America because of the irregularities in the voting. Now, you asked about the vote itself. I had one elderly man come, we were talking and we got onto the subject of the 1958 referendum. He was a retired military person, and in some southern drawl he goes, well, by golly, back in 1958 we were paid $5 to vote, and you can take a nice lady out of the town. And you just think about it. The price of gas was 15 cents, 15 cents, something like that. And a nice meal, I wasn't born yet, I understand, was 75 cents to $1. You could fill up your gas tank, you could take the lady out for a nice dinner and have enough for 25 cents drinks or...
Right.
So it was literally a night on the town.
Right. And they paid the military $5.
Yes.
So, how much do they pay the indigenous people? I'm making a joke.
Yes. Well, they paid indigenous peoples, they subjugated, dominated, and exploited them. That was their pay. They attempted to cloak their right to self-determination under international law, and what the United States of America did with these laws and policy that were implemented against us, virtually creating apartheid, they subjected us to crimes against humanity, and I'll explain how and why this became recognized as crime against humanity. During the struggle against apartheid in Namibia and South Africa, the General Assembly adopted a resolution stating that if you deny the right to self-determination on grounds of racial discrimination, you are committing crimes against humanity. But they did more than that. They depopulated us.
Can you talk about that a little?
Well, they sent diseases up there. There's one video that I have not seen, but others said, where they brought someone in from a ship, brought them house to house, who was infected with diseases, infected a lot of people, and they died as a result. So
They also had forced sterilization, as I understand.
Yeah,
this is what some elders had told me when I lived up in Kotzebue.
Yeah.
That you go to a doctor for whatever.
And of course there was...
You couldn't have kids later.
Yeah, typhoid and polio. They were inflicting diseases, as was the policy for the continental United States, where they were bringing in infected blankets and other things to, and not...
And Lord Jeffrey Amherst did this, you know?
Yeah, that's what you said to me.
Oh, I said that to you. Okay.
Yeah, you told me that.
Well, I read it in a book by, I think it was Lord Churchill. But,
yeah.
Okay. Because this is going on Amherst
now,
television. So.
Yeah. Now the other point is, we did civil resistance in '92. They wouldn't arrest us because we notified at the time Boutros Ghali, Bush 1, Boris Yeltsin, Queen Elizabeth of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We notified the Pope of the Vatican. We notified all the newspapers, major newspapers across the country, ABC, NBC, CBS, and we said you violated your suzerain trust responsibility to govern on behalf of the tribes of Alaska. We are invoking our international status, and if you harm us, we are subjecting you, or we will charge you under Public Law 100-606, the Genocide Convention, and crimes against humanity. So they didn't know what to do with us, because I found it wasn't until 1999 I discovered, when a senator came and talked to me, I asked him why, and he said, well, first of all, they were going to assemble media in Seattle and charter a plane to the point of destination where we were arrested, and it would have made national news. because of your message, the United States government did not want this issue or this message to go international.
Wow. Well, I noticed we got about 7 minutes left here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if you could talk, I mean, the United States must love you, or what is the relationship with the United States? I mean, if I may ask, have you ever gotten any hassles or
Oh,
something?
of course
Okay.
I've received
And
hassles.
what was their responses, and if you care to talk about that, and then just say a few words about what we can do to help out. I mean, maybe there's nothing we can do, or maybe give us some websites, or just what can we do? So those are the two things.
I've been in exile since 2003.
Okay.
I was called by some people in Alaska who warned me not to go back.
Okay.
This was, I think, the middle of September or the third week of September. And they said, we received some threats, and they were concerning you, that you will be arrested if you return.
Threats from the U.S. government?
Well, they didn't say where. They said some people called, and it was strange.
Okay.
A few months later, when I didn't go back, it was confirmed by diplomats that I would be arrested on any port of entrance into the United States of America. They tried to say others, because I didn't know why. Of course, I was doing all this protest, including saying, well, your government is founded on taxation without representation and consent of the governed. And we didn't consent to your governing us. You placed us on the list of non-self-governing territories. And it wasn't until 1971 or later on that you started attempting to charge us taxes when we didn't have to pay taxes. So we didn't consent to you governing us, and here you are charging taxes. You're a colonial government. And there's racial discrimination. It's based on your high court decisions, and it's institutionalized in your legislation. Why should I pay you when you never addressed our international legal and political status? You had a revolution based on the principle of taxation without representation. Why don't you address this? So they use the excuse, well, I don't pay taxes. Well, I'm in my own country, fishing and earning funds for my own resource, not yours. You're colonizing us. Why should I pay taxes? I actually went to the IRS building in Anchorage, Alaska. I did 3, because I used to pay taxes all the time. And when I discovered all this, I quit. I thought, why should I pay them? And so I thought, well, why don't I go and and I did 3 years. I kept very good records for my fishing business and other things. And so I did 3 years, and I gave them to her. She comes back to the room, the representative from the IRS, and she says, you didn't sign these. I said, I'm still thinking about it. And then she went out, she came back, and I had all my stuff in the box, and I was picking it up, and she says, what's happening? I said, I cannot pay the United States of America to commit genocide against our peoples. You're committing crimes against humanity, and you expect us to pay you for doing it. Not only that, you're taking our resources. Why should I pay you?
And what she said?
And I walked out the door. But what I discovered, because on the way out, because we had a little bit of time of discussion, somebody had come from upstairs and was sitting there, and he was beet red, and he was watching me carry my box with all my receipts and tax material out the door. And I was very resolute. And when I got home, I wrote a letter to myself. I said, Dear Ronald, I cannot pay for our demise. I cannot pay the United States of America for committing these violations against our people, for taking our land, our territory, our resources. I cannot pay them for committing genocide against our peoples.
Okay, and what then shall we do? What are some things that we
What,
can do?
what you can do, because this is affecting Americans. If the United States is not going to live up to its own constitution when it comes to peoples like us, you are not going to be able to live up to the Constitution of the United States of America, nor will you be able to hold these government officials accountable. It is up to you to hold them accountable for their constitutional obligations to us and to the treaties they signed internationally and to you. Now, you will create a better relationship with Indigenous peoples, so you need to question to Congress, to Washington, you need to write a letter to the Supreme Court justices, because the 1823 J.B. McIntosh and the 1955 Tehiton case have never been overturned.
Right.
So you need to say there's a problem with this universal periodic review, which I will make a speech
Tomorrow.
and testimony.
The United States won't be before the Human Rights Council in November, and they're responding, and then the NGOs are responding tomorrow. And we had this on our local television. Yes, say what you're going to say tomorrow, and then we should probably wrap up.
Well, I'm going to ask the United States to live up to the obligations. Among them, some states called upon them to respect the right of peoples to self-determination, to stop harming the environment. There was one specific recommendation to let Leonard Peltier go for his unjustifiable incarceration. And Amnesty International and some others who have studied this question, the United States hasn't proven the case with Leonard Peltier. They've overtaken the Indigenous peoples of Alaska without our free, informed consent. They expect us to pay taxes. What you need to do is to say to the United States government, you need to uphold your own constitution, because as I understand it, it is so far adrift from its constitution, and the United States of America is so run by corporations and multinational corporations that it's become a corporate...
They've also exploited Alaska.
Yeah.
The oil.
Oil.
Yeah, okay.
And you need to come to terms with who you are and what you want to be. Because you need to decide that if you're going to be a genuine people and country who uphold the rule of law and are truly democratic, you will allow democracy and the right of free choice to happen in Alaska, in Hawaii, for the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Recognize what was in the Shadow Report. We discovered that the term Indians not taxed, I looked behind this under the Federalist Papers, it means that the indigenous peoples were not political communities of the United States of America, but foreign to the United States. So there's a lot for you to learn, and if you'd like to be genuine about addressing the wrongs, then you would ask the United States government, the three branches of government, to address these wrongs.
Okay. Thanks, Ron. Do you have any last words?
Well, I hope you can live up to your own constitution, because if you cannot, then what's going to happen to your children, your grandchildren, when the corporations and the other powers that take over diminish even the right to breathe, because they're destroying the environment, and the right to eat, the right to food, the right of association, the right of freedom of expression. These are human rights, and for us, the right to self-determination.
Okay, thanks, Ron. How do you say thanks and goodbye?
Koyana.